Good evening, councillors. Welcome to tonight's Performance, Governance and Audit meeting, held on Thursday the 29th of July 2021. My name is Councillor Jeanette Stilts and I am the chair of this committee. Before we commence business of this meeting, there are a few housekeeping rules to run through. Members, the setup for the meeting has been designed to mitigate for COVID. Therefore, can I ask all present to work within the protocols agreed at Council on the 29th of April 2021, in the interest of member and officer safety. We are streaming this meeting live as well as recording, and by being present in the meeting, you are giving your consent to being recorded. Members and officers, during each item, please put your hands up or raise your paddle to indicate you will wish to speak. Then I will invite you at the appropriate time. When invited to speak, please remove your mask, put on your visor, turn on your microphone and speak clearly. Please reference a page or paragraph number when referring to the agenda papers. Keep your contributions as clear and concise as possible and ensure your microphones remain off when not speaking. Can I also call your attention to the safety of the building? The fire exit is behind me, and to please remember that the floors here are on different levels when walking around the chamber. Bernard, do we have any apologies for absence?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, we've received apologies for absence from Councillors Boyce and Jarvis. Thank you.
Thank you. Item 3 on your agenda is the minutes of the meeting held on the 10th of June 2021. It is recommended that the minutes of the meeting held on the 10th of June 2021 and found on pages 5 to 14 are approved as a true and accurate record. So I move. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Nunn. Members, do you wish to agree those minutes by assent or move to a vote? Agreed. Thank you. Item 4 on the agenda is declarations of interest. Members, it's to disclose the existence and nature of any disclosable pecuniary interests, other pecuniary interests or non-pecuniary interests related to items of business on the agenda, having regards to paragraph 6 to 8 inclusive of the Code of Conduct for members. Members are reminded that they are also required to disclose any such interests as soon as they become aware, should the need arise throughout the meeting. If any member has an interest to declare, please please put your hand up and use your paddle and I will invite you to speak. So do I have any declarations of interest? Councillor Fleming.
Thank you, Chair. As a member of Essex County Council, any item pertaining a non-pecuniary, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fleming. Any other items or declarations of interest? No, thank you. Item 5, public participation. I can advise that we have not received any submissions from members of the public. Item 6 on the agenda is the report, the internal auditor's report, progressor report, affordable housing and housing needs, audit, knowledge management, audit and follow-up of recommendations found on pages 15 to 56. I call upon Mr. Rubins to present the report. Thank you, Mr. Rubins.
Thank you very much, and it's good to be back in person, even though perhaps not quite in normal circumstances, but I'm sure we'll get there. There's quite a few reports as part of this item. There's 4 reports in total, so I'll take you through each of those in turn, and obviously there'll be time for questions at the end. So the first report is our progress report, and I'm talking to page 18 here of your pack. You'll see we've got 2 reports that I'll present this evening on knowledge management and housing needs. And then there's one further piece of work from last year, which is the fraud risk assessment, which will be presented to the next meeting. We've done the work, we've produced a report, and we're just agreeing that with officers at the moment, so that one will be at the next meeting. And then there's a number of pieces of work underway in the 21-22 plan. One other thing just to point out is you'll see that we've moved one of the audits for this year, climate change and sustainability, to the 22-23 year, and that's to give time to allow the sustainability strategy and plan to be developed, and then obviously that will give us something to audit in that year. So if I now talk to the first of the two reports that we're presenting in terms of audits that we've completed, the Affordable Housing and Housing Needs Report, and that starts on page 23 of your pack, and I'll talk to sort of page 26, which is the sort of key findings from that piece of work. So overall, we've given moderate assurance for the design of controls and the effectiveness of controls, and on the whole, we've found good processes in place for putting together a strategy and identifying your housing needs. But the key issue, and you'll see we've raised this as a sort of high priority issue on page 28, is that the council has not been meeting its targets around housing development. We did think quite carefully about this one, as does that actually create a limited opinion report, but we've given you, I suppose, the benefit of the doubt, and that actually if you look at the numbers, the council's quite slow to start with in developing this housing, but it has increased its pace, and if you take the last 2 years together, it's more or less been on target, but there's clearly still work to be done around that. We've also raised an issue about the Housing Strategy Board not meeting, and that's going to be put back together. And also around commuted funds, the Section 106 monies, needing a strategy for how you spend those. So a number of issues raised in that report, and we've had some positive responses from officers to that. And clearly, you know, there has been an impact of COVID on the perhaps the speed at which some of these things have been done, but there's work to be done there. The third report in this batch of 4 is the Knowledge Management Report, which starts on page 37 of your pack. And again, I'll talk to the key findings on page 40. So again, this is a moderate assurance for design and effectiveness. We found on the whole the council's got good processes in terms of identifying efficiencies, documenting those, getting staff involved and getting the ownership of that. And you know, that's been, I think, on the whole a good process. The key issues that we've raised are around documenting the prioritisation process as to, you know, what areas you look at first. And I think also on the business continuity plan, we found that was out of date. So since the council's been reorganised, you need to update your business continuity plan in terms of the key officers in that plan, and obviously that's important that people know who to turn to if there is an issue there. And then the fourth of these reports, which is on starts on page 49, is the follow-up of previous recommendations. And we've been able to sign off 3 recommendations with 2 overdue. One of those relates to building control, which is a high priority, but the council has recruited someone now to deal with that issue, and we're expecting that one to be dealt with by the end of September, and hopefully we can sign that one off next time. The other thing just to point out, we mentioned on page 52, is the safeguarding report. You'll know there were some issues there that members were concerned about. We haven't followed that up yet because the due dates for when those recommendations are supposed to be implemented hasn't been reached yet, but I understand from officers that there has been progress on that, and obviously officers can update you if you require. So that's quite a lot to go through, but I'm very happy to take questions.
Before you take the questions, can I move the recommendations? The recommendations found on page 15 of the report are Little 1, Internal Audit Report, at Appendix 21, that the committee considers comments and approves Little 1, the Internal Audit Process Report, July 2021 at Appendix 1. Little 2, the Affordable Housing and Housing Needs Audit, July 2021, Appendix 2. The Knowledge Management and Audit, June 2021, Appendix 3, and the follow-up of recommendations report, March 21, at Appendix 4. Can I have a seconder for these recommendations? Thank you, Councillor Nunn. So I will now open the debate. Councillor Nunn.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Mr Rubins, for your report. Could I go to Appendix 2, please? Affordable housing. Given the criteria, Mr Rubins, for the colour coding, I found red to be quite harsh in this report. Given that you've acknowledged the difficulties through COVID, but unless I've misread page 28, this council over-delivered its affordable housing over 2 successive years. Also, you've said that you've had officer responses to some of the queries, and I wonder really whether they have been included in this report. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr Rubins.
So, well, it's interesting, that perspective, because we've had other queries from members saying perhaps we've been too lenient on the council on this, so I don't know, maybe that means we've got it right. But if you look at page 28, you're right, there are 2 years where the council has exceeded its targets, but they're not successive years. So 2021, for example, 68% delivery rate, so below the 100% that you need. So an overall a 49% delivery rate. So I would say for such a key target, I do think that is a high priority, and it's important to see that consistently met each year. We do have responses from officers. So if you look, for example, at the bottom of page 29, there is a management response there, and it says that each of the recommendations are going to be met either in September or December of 21. And there will be member oversight of that. So, as I said, I think we've had a reasonable management response to those issues.
Could I come back, please, Chair?
You can.
So, thank you for that, Mr Rubins. I'm not sure which members have said that this is lenient, because I thought it was subject to this committee's scrutiny. But thank you for your response to that. I am, however, very concerned about the building control element and how that's in red, and that does concern me greatly as far as development within this district council is concerned.
Yeah, sorry, my comment was relating to we have a pre-meeting with members before, with the chair and the vice chair before, and I don't think they were saying it was lenient, but they were saying why did we go down that side of moderate. That was that. I agree with you about the building control. It is a high priority, needs to be addressed, but as I said, there is recruitment of someone to deal with those issues, and we are expecting it to be implemented next time.
Thank you, Mr Rubins. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Mr Leslie, did you want to come back before I go on to the other councillors?
Yeah, thank you. Just to provide some more information around the building control. Obviously, they've outlined the reasons in terms of resourcing. It hasn't been delivered to date. Mr Rubins has obviously confirmed that there's additional resource in post temporarily now to specifically address that audit requirement. The latest update is the work is nearly completed and it is on track at the moment to be done by the September deadline that's currently been given.
Thank you. Councillor Hurd, I see you've got your hand up, and I see you've got your hand up, Councillor Hull. Councillor Hurd.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I just take you to page 20, please? And perhaps Mr Rubins can help me through you, Chair. Climate change and sustainability, are they 2 separate audits?
No, that would be one audit.
Okay, the reason I ask is that obviously climate change is very much in the current in the news currently, and I'm wondering why that one has been. I appreciate you've touched upon it so far, but why that one in particular has been moved to 22-23, whereas policy review perhaps maybe didn't seem to me to be so urgent.
Yes, I think I did mention before that the council is developing its climate change strategy, and I think it's just one of those practical, pragmatic, things that we decided it would be better to wait until that strategy's been developed and we can see what direction the council's going in, what actions it intends to take, and then audit that, rather than if we were to audit it before that, we'll probably be suggesting things that the council would be doing anyway that wouldn't necessarily add value. So that was the conversation around that. But I do take the point, it's an important area.
Thank you. And the second question, if I may, Chair, on page 26, again about the affordable housing target. Again, you've also alluded to the fact that we are on course to deliver less than 50% of the affordable housing target. You've given a moderate assurance on this, although allowing 130 affordable houses per year over the last 7 years from 2014, so we should have 910, but we've actually got 400. How do you get the assurance that we will be able to be on target for that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's possibly the converse of the argument we were talking about before. So I think if you actually look at the last 3 years, so 1920 to what is projected to happen in 21-22, you'll see that over those 3 years the council is expecting to deliver its targets if you take those 3 years together. So I think that's where we're seeing the improvement after what I agree is a very slow start, and that is really what's contributed to the council being so far behind.
Right. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Mr Leslie, you did put your hand up. Did you want to come back?
Just really to echo what Mr Rubin said around the climate change strategy, that is one of the council's priorities. Strategy we're coming forward to members to approve, so it felt a bit premature at this stage, but we didn't have the approved strategy to actually undertake an audit, and it would be far more effective to wait until next year.
I'm going to go to Councillor Hull and then I'll come to you, Councillor Fleming. Councillor Hull.
Thank you. I heard, it came to me this week that a lot of the affordable housing have been sold to a London council. Is this so? And if it is so, do our local people, are they still able to, are the housing still for them also?
Can I hand that over to Mr Swords, please?
Good evening, members. No, we often have this rumour in the district. I am not aware at this current point in time of any such situation of any London borough buying affordable housing out here. On all the strategic sites, we're aware of who the housing associations are, through obviously contact with them and with the developers. And on those strategic sites, just to reassure members that as it's new build, people of the district on the housing register in housing need, we get 100% nomination rights on first lets of those properties. It isn't to say that a London borough couldn't buy properties in this district and do that, as they have done in other areas, but no, I'm not aware of it. And on our strategic sites and any of the developments I'm working with the housing associations, I'm not aware of any London councils buying affordable units.
Thank you, Mr Swords. Councillor Fleming.
Thank you, Chair. Just turning to page 28, the table 1, it says 2021-22, units completed and then in brackets units expected. Am I correct in thinking that units expected is just applicable to this year? And how do we derive that figure? Is it just sort of plucked from the sky, or is there, so far we've achieved half, and so it's reasonable to assume that we'll achieve the other half in the second part of the year? Thank you.
Before I go to Mr Swords, Councillor Hull, can you turn your mic off, please? And Councillor Fleming. Thank you. Mr Swords, do you want to answer that?
Those figures that you're seeing over 2021 and previous years, I monitor on my own development spreadsheet with all the developers and the housing associations on a regular basis with them, what's happening with those units, when are they due to be complete. So I'm constantly keeping up to date with what's coming through. And those numbers and figures I feed into the Section 106 officer, because I believe he also does a half-yearly report, I think, back to this committee on what's happening with all the affordable in the district. And the figure there, we had to look at the financial year. So obviously we're still in the financial year until at March, April. And obviously we've taken account there of units so far, I believe, completed to date on that figure. So we've still got stuff coming through now, up until Christmas and into the new year. We've got affordable units coming through.
Is there any more questions for this? No. You've all had the recommendations in front of you. Do you agree those recommendations by assent, or would you like to go to the vote?
Agree.
Thank you. We move on to item 7, which is the internal audit and statement of assurance 2020 to 2021, found on pages 57 to 76. I will call again on Mr. Rubins to present this report. Thank you, Mr. Rubins.
Thank you. It's worth me coming after all. So this is our annual report, annual opinion, so it summarises our work for the year. So there shouldn't be too many surprises in here. I'm going to talk to pages 61 and 62 of your pack on this. So you'll see overall we've given moderate assurance. That's our second highest level of assurance in terms of where we think you are overall on governance, risk and control. And it's the same level we gave last year. I think on the whole, actually, if you look at the individual opinions, there's been an improvement since last year. We've got no limited opinions this year, and that's good to see. And I think particularly given the circumstances of the year with COVID and the pressures on staff, I think that's a very positive conclusion. There still are some issues, obviously, and we've talked about the housing report. There was the safeguarding report as well that we presented earlier in the year. So still some things to address, I would say. And you'll see on the themes on page 69, we've tried to sort of summarise some of the areas that we think the council perhaps could look at. That in terms of, we think that there's some generally good processes, well-designed processes, but the implementation sometimes is not 100% consistent. So there's still work to be done around that. But I think overall, as I said, I think it's a positive report. And we also comment on the back of the report on page 73 on the internal audit performance, and again I think that's gone pretty well in terms of delivering the plan. Still challenges for us as well in terms of delivering under COVID, and we'll be aiming for more timeliness next year in terms of completing all the plan earlier in the year. But I think overall we've had good feedback on our work, and hopefully that will be endorsed by members. But happy to take any comments or questions.
Thank you. Before we go to that, I would like to move the recommendations that the committee considers comments and approves the Little 1 Internal Audit Annual Report and Annual Statement of Assurance for 2020-21 at Appendix 1. Can I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Nunn. Now I open the debate. Does any members have questions? Councillor Hurd.
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to be clear on page 62. You've spoken about this year, the current year and previous year. It says in the current year the majority of audits provide substantial assurance, and then it says limited is 1. And then in the second bullet point it says limited 2, and then in the third one it says we did not issue any limited assurance reports this year. I'm just a bit unsure as to which year you're referring to. Is it the current year, the previous year, or this year?
So we're referring to the year 2021, so the year ending 31st of March 2021, and in that year there were no limited opinions, but we then give in brackets the figures for 1920, so the previous year to that, where there were some limited opinions, and that's where those numbers come from. I hope that's clear.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Any other questions? No. You've had the recommendations in front of you, members. Would you like to agree these by assent or move to a vote?
Agreed.
Thank you. Mr. Rubins, thank you very much for that. Item 8 on the agenda is the External Audit and Audit Planning Report to March 31. You move to item 8 on the agenda, found on pages 37 to 50. No, it's not. Found on pages 77 to 108. Mr. Wisdom, would you like to come and present your report? Thank you, Mr. Wisdom.
Good evening, good evening, everyone. As per usual, I'll assume the document is read, but I will just pull out some of the key messages. So just a reminder that the work that I perform continues to be carried out in accordance with the Code of Audit Practice and supporting regulations which are published by the National Audit Office. The scope of my work includes the audit of the accounts, along with satisfying myself that the council has made proper arrangements for securing value for money. There have been significant changes to the code with respect to the value for money requirements, and these are set out in more detail on page 94 of the pack. The materiality level that I use has been set on a consistent basis to that I used in previous years, and that then calculates at £1.2 million. It is worth mentioning, or it is worth remembering though, that I do report all errors that I identify through the course of my audit in excess of £60,000. So whilst my overall materiality is high, I do report all errors over £60,000. As you would expect, the pandemic has continued to impact the audit, both in terms of the risk profile, as well as the way that we conduct the audit. And again, there is more detail on that on pages 88 and 89 of the pack. The significant risks that I'm going to be focusing on this year are management override of controls. A reminder that auditing standards presume that there is a risk around accounts being fraudulently misstated by management around overriding of controls. So this is a significant risk for every single audit that we have. It's not unique to Malden. The areas that we focus in for this risk are the preparation of accounting estimates, looking at inappropriate journal entries and also transactions which have no economic substance. The second significant risk is a new one this year, and it is the recognition of COVID-19 related income. The reason I've included this as a significant risk is because, I'm sure you're well aware, there are a number of new grants with a significant value which are accounted for, and these grants can be accounted for in different ways, and some of them require judgment as well as to how they're accounted for. So those are the two significant risks. But I also have some areas of focus that I've highlighted in the plan. Those areas of focus are the pension liability. Again, I focused on this last year, and in particular I'm looking at the assumptions that are used as part of that, the calculation of that actuarial liability. And the second area of focus, again, will be familiar to those of you who've been on the committee. We'll be focusing on the valuation of property, plant and equipment. You may well recall that this was escalated to a significant risk last year due to the level of errors that we identified. However, having reviewed the results of our work and also the Council's response to our recommendations, I've downgraded that back down to an area of focus for the year. There's more detail on each of the significant risks and the areas of focus within the report. Chair, that's the highlights from the report that my plan that I was going to pull out, but I'm obviously happy to take questions.
Thank you. Before we take those questions, I will move the recommendations. And the recommendation as set out in the report is as follows. Recommendation 1, that the external audit planning report as shown in Appendix 1 be considered. Can I have a seconder for that recommendation? Thank you, Councillor Nunn. Members, I open the debate. Councillor Nunn.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Wisdom. I'm surprised that you're going to focus on pension liability as an issue, bearing in mind that this is a local authority and the staff, if they're in a pension scheme, will be in the local government pension scheme. So it's a nationally recognised scheme, and any liabilities I would have thought would have been assessed by the actuary. So what exactly will you be auditing when it comes to that, please?
Certainly. So what you say is entirely correct, but the outcome of everything that you've said is that there is a significant liability that sits on the council's balance sheet. And that liability is large, but it's also very judgmental. So those actuarial assumptions, they are determined by an actuary, absolutely, but they are subject to a lot of judgment. So that's one element of it. But the other area that there is judgment around is there are a number of assets that obviously reduce the overall actuarial the liability that appears on your balance sheet. And again, some of those assets are relatively straightforward, so they are valued gilts, for example, are very relatively straightforward, but other of those assets are actually quite difficult to value, and again, there is significant judgment associated with those assets. So, for example, if they were invested in private equity funds. So the combination of those two elements, there are a lot of judgment, there is a lot of estimate, and the result of all of that is a large liability that sits in the council's balance sheet, and that's why I have it as an area of focus.
Could I come back on that, please, Chair? Thank you for that, Mr. Wisdom. But presumably, when you talk about the investment is by the scheme, not by this council.
Yes, you're correct. But the scheme, as I say, ultimately the liability does sit on the council's balance sheet, and the council is responsible for that liability. So yes, the investment decisions are made by the pension scheme, and there is a pool of assets, but the results of those decisions directly impact the council, because the end result is the net liability that sits on your balance sheet. So, yeah.
So, sorry, just in conclusion then, so you're assessing the risk, but it's not a controllable risk?
I would agree with you, it's not directly controllable by yourself, no, but it is still, it does ultimately fall to you as a council. It is ultimately your responsibility to ensure that the number is correct, because it is in your accounts and you're signing off that those accounts are correct.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Wisdom. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Leslie wants to come in on that.
Sorry, just to make clear as well that quite rightly the pension fund is administrated by Essex County Council. They look after that for the district authorities, and they will be using their actuaries to get the figures, which they will then provide to us, and they have those figures audited as well. So it's those figures from Essex County Council's actuaries which we use, and we don't obviously administer the scheme.
Councillor Stevens.
Thank you, Chair. My question's about the fees that are outlined on page 106. Seems to have gone up from 54.8 to 88.6 thousand in a year. It does say something about a scale fee increase, but as a new councillor, I'm not too sure what that means. Could you explain that for us, please? Thank you.
Yes, so in terms of the fees that we've put in there, again, as a new councillor, we've had a number of discussions around fees, and the fee that's in there is the proposed fee from me, which still has to be approved by PSAA. So the scale fee is the base fee that is set by PSAA, and anything that is above that scale fee then has to be approved by PSAA. Well, it has to be approved by the council and PSAA. So again, I'm happy to provide further detail if needed in terms of the historical position. But as I say, that there was a paper that has come to previous committees which set out the basis for that fee, which that the council has then asked for PSAA's input on, and PSAA are in the process of assessing that, and then we'll come back with a decision on that as well.
I'll go to Mr. Leslie, so he might be able to clarify some.
Yeah, thank you. So yes, we've held a number of discussions around this, and we have circulated a briefing paper to the committee, but I'm not sure whether you were on the committee at that time. Because so I'm happy to circulate. I think that would be beneficial to perhaps do that round to the new committee, which perhaps will answer some of the questions. But yes, we've been engaged with the external auditors for quite a while around those fees. The scale fees were set several years ago now, and they are subject to fee variations. And I think Mr. Wisdom has explained that due to the nature and the increases in auditor requirements, which have been substantial over recent times, we're seeing a lot of increase in terms of audit fees around that side of it. The fee has been reduced through initial discussions, and what will happen now with the fee is once the audit's concluded, the auditors will submit that to the body, the PSAA, who will review those fees on behalf, and they effectively give the judgment around that. If they feel they're fair and they have the final say, they will contact us as well within that process, so we can put our side across. And part of the work they do as a large body, look after I think all of the councils' audits as well. They will do benchmarking, and from time to time they could even look at some of the work that the auditors have undertaken and have a look at that to do that. So that's where their skills, expertise and benchmarking ability come in. But until the audit is completed, that process can't take place.
Councillor Hurd.
Thank you, Chairman. I go back to the point made by Councillor Nunn as a response. If Essex County Council are the actuary and they are doing an audit, why are we doing a second audit? Will help me on that.
Mr Rubins?
So Mr Davies is right when he described the fact that the audit of Essex County Council happens, but Essex County Council represents a number of different bodies. The staff that are employed by a number of different councils is not just Malden. What the actuary does is they work out what Malden's specific bit of the Essex, the total pot is, and then they send those figures across to Malden. So the numbers that are audited by Essex Pension Scheme are the whole of the pension scheme. So obviously those incorporate Malden, but they will audit to a much larger and a much greater materiality because they're looking at the whole thing. Whereas what I'm interested in is the bit that's been carved out, and is that bit that's been carved out, is that correct? And is the liability that's ultimately resting, that is the liability that management are recording, or council officers are recording in the accounts, is that the right amount for Malden? And so that's the bit that I'm auditing.
Is there any other questions? Councillor Fleming.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to go to page 103, Appendix 2, uncorrected misstatements. I just wanted an explanation for both items there, overstatement of council office valuation and the Goodwin judgment impact pensions. Thank you.
Mr Leslie.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so those were the ones from last year's accounts. The valuation of the offices, valuations by their nature are subjective, and it's below materiality, so there's no requirement to change those from the perspective. Could just check, is the question why weren't they adjusted for, or why did they occur? Sorry.
Yeah, just interested to know how they occurred. Thank you.
Okay. So in terms of the evaluation of the office, it relates to, I believe, the overflow car park there. So essentially it was a bit of a double count in the valuations, because it included the car park twice. I think that was the main issue around that. And in terms of the McLeod judgment, that again relates to the pension scheme. So late in the day, we had an adjustment to the original pension value, but because of obviously the size of the scheme and the fact that it's largely an estimate, we didn't adjust for that when we had subsequent information from the actuaries around the impact of the McLeod judgment to the pension fund liability.
Is there any other questions for Mr Wisdom or Mr Leslie? No? You have the recommendations before you. Are members happy to accept those by assent or move to a vote? Thank you. Thank you, Mr Wisdom, for that presentation. Item 10 on the agenda is any other business that the chairman decides is urgent. I have none. So item 11 on the agenda is closure of the minutes. Members, thank you for your contributions this evening. I draw the meeting to a close at 8:10. As the meeting is now closed, members are advised not to enter into any further discussion on this